I do believe that we will have some additional members come in.
We can add them.
Okay.
Dee Dee's not coming, you know.
I did not know.
She's back east with her, she let me know.
Oh, that's right,
she'll
she
come
did,
up to me,
absolutely,
remember,
that's
yes.
right, yes, right.
Back east with
Okay.
her daughter touring college.
Doing college
Oh,
tours,
wow.
yeah.
Yes.
So maybe this is all we're gonna get. Okay. So I'll call the, meeting of the Civic Center Advisory Committee to order on October 15th at 3 p.m. at 3:05 p.m. And we'll do the roll call, please.
DeGoya,
I do expect him.
I just saw the start pulling up.
Okay, he is arriving.
Dilstar,
Here.
Fisher,
She's excused.
Hall. Here. Lively.
Here.
Meredith,
You here?
Tenelli,
Here.
Dowdy.
Here.
Okay, so we do have a quorum, only one member excused and another member on his way. So if there's any members of the public who would like to speak at this time, I would like to open the floor for public comment. Okay, seeing none, I'll close the floor for public comment, and I'll call for the approval of the minutes of the September 24th meeting. Are there any discussions or comments on the minutes from the September 24th meeting? I was not in attendance, and reading them, it seems that there was a lot of feedback from the HMC consultants on our public outreach meeting, and then there was an ad hoc committee formed. So any other discussion?
One thing I saw here that George is gonna wanna be here for, is not critical to have the public work courtyard in town, review options of the cities.
Yeah.
And I think that staff had indicated that they would need to look at that and further advise us if that was the case or not, because they weren't so sure that was correct.
Right, that was a surprising bit of information to me as I read it, that was something that was, reported back as something that was even up for discussion, because I don't think that is part of what should be up for discussion, right?
Yeah.
Any other comments on the minutes? Shall I entertain a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Dobby and Vice Chair DeGoya, seconds. All those in- And you weren't here either, Rose? Okay.
I was here, you need two people who were here to do it.
Well, Mr. Dobby,
Jim wasn't here.
I wasn't here.
oh, you weren't here.
No, there were just four of us, it was Rich, me, Dee Dee, and.
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
Well,
so the two of us can do it.
Okay, all right.
I'll move to approve.
I forgot I was
But, so did you have a quorum?
Yeah,
Yes, we had four.
Four is a quorum.
We need 4 of 7.
Because two of you were, yeah, we had four, but even two of you
Good.
are a different kind of member.
Okay, so Mr.
We had a quorum.
Dostard made the motion to approve, and Mr. DeGoya, Vice Chair DeGoya seconded it
With that one edit,
with the edit about the not critical. Are
that
you
the
wanting?
staff was gonna come back and talk to us about that. They were gonna look at it and come back and talk to us
Okay.
Yes.
All those in favor?
about it.
All right,
Okay.
that's me. I wasn't here.
And you weren't here
I
either?
abstained.
So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 people abstaining.
Well, you don't formally vote, but
No, I
There's-
formally don't vote.
there's
Neither do
3
you.
abstain. Oh, you don't either.
And I, yes,
So
We
have-
don't formally vote because we're non-voting members.
that's true.
So 3 of your 5 voting members are voting
Yes.
for
Okay.
approval.
Perfect.
3 people who were here.
Okay, and staff's gonna come back with the courtyard information for us. Okay, moving on, our regular agenda. Item number 4, to review the CCAC charter and purpose and discuss our final outreach meetings. So, I think to kind of set the stage for this meeting, we just kind of have to remind ourselves what our charter is, what our parameters are, and to that end, I've got a little handout I'm just going to pass out. It's a copy from the website. One more. that talks about our committee charter and the members, what our duties are, what our charges that has been given to us by the city council, with the boundaries and the parameters of what they expect us to be doing. And so we don't get in the weeds too deeply in or off on tangents. So if we could kind of summarize this, maybe I'll maybe turn it over to the city manager, if you want to kind of talk about that now.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Yeah.
When the city council, excuse me, okay, go for a bit of a cold from the weekend. When the city council set the charter for the CCAC, they were very deliberate in terms of what the paragraphs meant and where this committee had the ability to, what issues the committee had the ability to address and what issues they didn't want you, as the mayor indicated, getting into the weeds about. So they talked about assisting staff in the development of the master planning process to determine key issues that need to be addressed by the community, as well as a process for keeping the community at large informed and involved. Working with staff to solicit feedback through tools such as surveys, workshops, community gatherings, and disseminating that information. Engaging in public outreach to solicit feedback and opinions on the master plan. The CCAC may form ad hoc committees or host community workshops to involve a broader base of residents for the purposes of information gathering on specific issues. And then once the plan's adopted, the CCAC will continue to work to coordinate public outreach and collect resident input during the design phase of the project, and then also assist in the discussion of the short-term improvements needed for the library and the Civic Center facilities as they currently sit. Now, in addition to that, the council gave one specific directive, and that's in respect to the library ad hoc committee. They directed the library ad hoc committee to come back, do an analysis to get some specific square footage nailed down for the library. And the ad hoc committee did that, hired a consultant with the council approval. Brad Cox went out and did that, came back, provided that number. But beyond that, the main focus of the CCAC is to facilitate community input with respect to the master planning process, gather feedback, and conduct public outreach. Town hired HMC with this committee's recommendation. The committee assisted in that. That's the professional, in the room, so to speak, to deal with, square footage, needs analyses, and things like that, disconnected to the library one because that one was separate and separate directive for the council. So at the last committee meeting, there was a subcommittee formed to work on the police department, in specific to go out and do a survey and do very much similar activities to what the ad hoc committee for the library did in conducting the needs analysis and such. And when I heard that, I wasn't able to attend the meeting, but I did watch the video and listen. I heard that, and my kind of alarm bells went off in my head and said, wait a minute, that's kind of beyond the scope of the committee in terms of what the council set up for the committee to do. So I sent an email to the chair and the vice chair saying, hey, maybe it would help to refresh this committee's charter so that they understood not to get in the weeds and kind of look at the 40,000 foot level for the project and assist with the public outreach, and that should be their focus. If you would like the staff to spend additional time and the consultant to spend additional time doing surveys of other policing agencies and comparing square footages, then I would suggest you kind of get the same sort of directive that you did for the library ad hoc committee and say, with council direction, say, yes, we want that level of detail done by the committee or done by staff. And if there's additional cost involved to have HMC or to have, Gordon, who's the project manager here, go out and do that, then there may need to be a budget amendment or use some contingency funds to do that. The committee itself is, of course, as the ad hoc, free to go out and gather information and provide that input. But in terms of directing the consultants based on that input, I think that's a bit of a conflict between your charter and where the committee's.
Can I get some background on what happened?
Yes.
You guys weren't here.
Can I just, before you do that, just say one thing, that when this kind of came back to me, I talked with one of the other committee members and I said, what's going on? I mean, this seems, kind of a lot, especially after I got Gordon's email with the list of all the police departments and everything. And it was reported that, the consultants had come and presented a 4-story police station. And I said, they did? That mean, and in reading the minutes, it didn't, indicate that at all. I mean, I didn't know, and so I didn't watch every minute of the last meeting, so I don't know. I mean, did they really come back and present to you a 4-story
Well, I could be more
police station?
specific than that. So it was, the difference, the dissonance came around the police department.
Mhm.
4-story building was a comprehensive solution they were looking at, including the police department. But just the police department, if I recall, doubled in size from the largest we've ever talked about,
Mhm.
including with, what the guys up in,
Coleman,
no, the guys up in Northern California that did the other.
Nichols Milburn?
Yeah, NMR.
Yeah.
And a Blue Ribbon Committee, our numbers, NMR is double. And so we just went, what happened? And the response from the consultant was, we know what we're doing.
Hmm.
And so we said, we don't look very smart because it doesn't bear any resemblance to what we've been talking about for 2 or 3 years now. So we said, would it make sense to do a little study of police departments in comparable towns in the Bay Area
Mm.
to see, things that have been built in the last 10 or 15 years and what do they look like?
Mhm.
And they said, well, we had all these assumptions wrong, and you were wrong about many things that were just wrong. It was kind of a global. I think they believe they're right. So I don't think it was, they're not misleading anything. And so we said, well, a few of us said, well, maybe we should just verify those assumptions, because it was kind of
Mhm.
this is what it's going to be. And then we got nervous about going to the public with a double the size police department footprint.
Understandable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's where this came
Yeah.
from.
Okay, so just
the
to,
gun range.
to kind of do a level set here.
Yeah.
The reason that we're meeting at 3 o'clock today rather than 4 o'clock
Mhm.
is because George sent Elizabeth and I this memo, sort of trying to re-foot us into the charter for the CCAC. And he felt like the discussion at the last meeting was on the verge of getting away from the charter, as he just stated.
Mhm.
My response to him, Elizabeth wasn't at that meeting, was, well, that's true, but it's really true because the consultants brought up to us a series of options that included certain information that we reacted to, including the increased square footage on the police department. And that we felt, as a committee, that it would be wise for us as residents to get some grounding in not necessarily the basis of their assumptions, because they were making their assumptions off of the multiple police departments they've designed and experience that they've had, but we felt that it would be wise for us as residents to get out there and see some of these police departments. And that was likened to what the ad hoc library committee did with respect to the libraries we visited. And George is absolutely right that there was a different charter for the ad hoc library committee and we didn't have that charter with respect to the police department, but I don't think that the intent was for the committee to give direction to the consultants. It was just to get some additional information. So
Right.
Elizabeth and I got together and talked about the email that we got from George and the issue of the charter, and we felt it would be wise for all of us to meet an hour before the consultants so that we can talk without the consultants, because honestly, I think part of the problem was the way that they sort of focused us. And I think it's appropriate for all of us to talk about, okay, let's be focused on the charter, but let's also talk about how we want to sort of, direct the consultants to focus on the charter also.
Well, yes, Rose.
Okay, I was not, can I say something more important?
No, go ahead.
I wasn't at this meeting, but, I'm listening to all this, and my first question was, why is this coming up? And now I understand this. I think that the town residents need to validate this square footage number as we did with the library. It's gonna be controversial. If it's doubled in size, there's no way we can let a consultant just railroad us into a building like this. So whether or not we alter the charter, is irrelevant. We need to alter the charter. And then when George, when you're saying that we're going to alter what, our contract with the architects, I'm really puzzled by that, because their charter was never to develop the square footage for this police department, which happens to be their expertise. I mean, did they alter the admin building? Did they alter anything else? I mean, why, it just doesn't bear any, logic. I mean, it happens to be the expertise, but it doesn't mean that they can alter it. And the fact that they did alter it means that they spent more time on it, but who asked them to?
Well, I think their task is to develop the master plan.
Right.
That's what we hired them to do.
Right.
And in doing so, much like they had to do for the library, and this committee assisted with doing that for the library, they had to develop what the needs were. And the needs drove what the size of that box was gonna be. What the box looks like is something that's gonna be part of the design phase of this particular project. But it's a box, and they're gonna develop a master plan with boxes of different sizes, but they need to know what the needs are. You can't develop a police station of 5,000 square feet if your needs are actually one of 10,000 square feet.
Did we ask them to do that?
Yes.
Yeah,
That's
that
part
was
of
part
the
of
charter.
Yes, that was part of
But
their.
for me, the problem was they didn't reconcile it to 3 other pieces of work.
Mhm.
Blue Ribbon, our work, and NMR. There was no reconciliation other than we know what we're doing.
Well, as you
So-
mentioned, Steve, sorry, as you mentioned, they did indicate that they did look back at the Blue Ribbon, and they did look back at.
They said they looked at it, but there was no, by the way, we doubled the square footage and here's why.
They
and here's
didn't
a
want
bunch of
us-
data to
Well,
base it on.
that is
Well,
that's the missing link, and
Yeah,
that's
they
what
can
I was
provide
gonna
that.
say. Are there features that are required by law in
Right.
new facilities that we have never looked at when we were doing the Blue Ribbon Task Force, the Town Center Task Force, or NMR, you
Which is
know?
what they indicated.
But we need to know that, and we need to know that this is by law. If you're going to, it's like ADA compliance, right?
Yeah.
It will trigger, if you do $141,000 worth of tenant
Right.
improvements or
No, right.
something, then you have to upgrade your bathrooms, upgrade your egress and ingress.
Yeah, and they can articulate that, and they
So-
should articulate that in more
I get
detail
it,
to this
but I think
committee.
the other issue is looking ahead to bringing this back to council someday.
Yes, so what we
We
need
need
to
to be
do,
comfortable either
Yeah.
saying, we don't have a clue if they're right,
right,
or we did some due diligence and we think it's valid.
And I have, like I said, I have no problem with
But
this
but we
committee
need to
doing the due
maybe
diligence.
go back to council
Yes.
with that prior to validating it. We need to take, as a committee, say, there's this police, disconnect, square footage disconnect, and we need to enhance our charter, give us some additional funds to vet this out, just like we did.
I was on the Blue Ribbon Task Force,
Yeah,
and, at the time, I would say we did a pretty thorough job. William Brindley especially, who was on that task force, went through the needs
mhm,
of the police department. We did it sort of bottoms up, and we looked at things by law that were required. Maybe I'm not saying that we didn't miss a few things, but we did, it wasn't just a, wet finger number that we came up with. We actually went through, talked to all the police department, the people in the police department. I don't think Ed was there at that time, but we talked to, the various other people and got some idea of what they thought was necessary. So I don't think we came up with a number that was even close to what.
And that's what HMC did as well. They met with the entire police department, they met with other agencies, and that's how they came up with their numbers. They read the Blue Ribbon report, they read through the other architectural report, meshed them all together, applied current rules, and said, this is what we're recommending.
But,
And they can come back and provide that
One of the
detail.
problems is, and this is, in all the business planning I've done, if you ask people what do they need, you're gonna, if you add up all these, what do you need, you're gonna add up to huge numbers. You've got to, the way you ask what do you need is what things are you going to be doing here?
And that is what they
that's
asked.
exactly what they asked.
Yeah.
That is what they asked.
That's
They
exactly.
came into my office and said, do you really need this conference table here? Do you really need this?
What are your
It was
questions?
what we
Yes.
were trying to get to with Gordon.
Yeah,
And Gordon, speak up if I'm mistaken, was we want to get to a group of 20
mhm,
fairly comparable towns, and I know there are no comparable towns to Atherton, but,
mhm,
in Northern California, within an hour,
mhm.
and we don't have to go see them all, but just something that's reasonable, comparable, labor rates are similar, and a town of a similar size, and not a lot of retail, mainly residential, and we just want to see how big they are. And these are built in the last 10, 15 years, you call it, and that's it. And then we'll just look at square footage and say, we could do a first blush, and it could be literally one spreadsheet this big, and say, yeah, it's in the ballpark, or no, we're an outlier, and then decide to go further than that. If we need to ask council for that permission to ask staff to do it, then
For additional
just do
funds.
it.
But
Rose,
again,
wait a
the
minute,
blue
let
ribbon
me
task
we'll
force,
do Rose first, and then we'll do.
You know, I just had, you know, you mentioned something about going to council for additional funds. What would the additional funds be for?
Staff time.
Staff time only? And, but, you know, at the library committee, did we
Yes.
burn up staff time?
Mhm.
Well, all we did was we hired that Brad.
You hired somebody to do the work.
Okay, so we're talking about a nominal amount. We're not,
Yeah,
Yeah, it's nominal, but
I think it's a process more
I
than.
I would say this, at
And
the blue
excuse
ribbon task force, we also visited at least 6 police stations,
Just on your own,
just on our own.
without staff accompanying you.
Yeah, and we asked all the same kind of questions that you're asking, you know?
Mhm.
Well, who did this? What do you need it for? I mean, one of them said, well, I remember, you know, you need a separation from the public, from a safety viewpoint,
Mhm.
to the police department. In other words, people can't just walk in and pull a gun out and shoot somebody. And so some of that is all documented, I'm sure.
So Vice
Okay,
Chair?
so I think that it makes sense for us to have an ad hoc committee go and look at some other departments to vet it out. But I think the first thing is we need them to walk us through how they came up with what they came up with. And, you know, we may end up taking a little more time on this than we had planned. But I agree with what Steve said. We really need to be able to understand it and embrace it, because when we go to the council, we need to, you know, as close as possible unanimously support it. I mean, this is a big, big project for the town. And I think we need to take the time to be comfortable with it. I think it's premature to decide to ask for additional funds.
I do too.
I would like to have the ad hoc committee go look at a couple other police stations and get the data that we've asked for and review it. And then let's assess if we need to go back and ask for funds.
Just to be clear, if we need funds, it was just to get a list. We wanted to be objective, and not say, my favorite police station is Portola Valley or something. To be objective, just to have a sieve, pick a radius, have dynamic, you know, towns of 5 to 10, you know, I think we were narrowing down to towns of 5 to 10,000 people, which are primary residential, within, we were trying to come up with miles. I think it was 45 miles of here. And so it was objective, so it wasn't cherry picking, it wasn't, gee, they have a really luxurious one, or they have a really cheap one, it wasn't, you know. That was the goal, that was the entire study, to come up with that list, and then, if, you know, and then the question is, who phones them and finds out how big is the police department?
Yeah, and that's the staff time. So if it's
Yeah.
the
So
committee that
it's-
wants to do that.
It's a day.
So if the ad hoc subcommittee, who in the library ad hoc subcommittee contacted the various libraries to?
we all did.
We all
Yeah,
took-
individually, you did.
Yeah, we all
So
did.
if
We
we could,
managed.
if we could do that.
And you got the square footage that way?
Yeah,
We
well,
came
yeah,
to the
it's-
square
when
footage
we-
because we went and looked at other libraries, some in similar communities, some in not dissimilar
But did they
communities.
tell you the square
They
footage? or
did.
the
They
square-
Well, sure, they told us the square
Of
footage, but
that
the
particular library.
footage really comes from
Yeah.
the new needs assessment that we did.
Demographics.
It does include, you know, things that we saw that we thought were important for our library, but mostly it includes the size of our population, an estimate of proper square footage per
Which is-
service
Yeah.
population.
But I think what Steve was asking was, if they had a certain space, did they tell you it was 1,750 square feet, or did you guess it?
No, no,
Oh,
no,
they
they
told
told
us.
us.
They gave us
They told us.
everything.
And you guys got the members of the committee called as opposed to staff?
We called.
Yeah,
Oh,
we
yeah,
called.
all the appointments.
We set up all the appointments. The one thing I caution you on is, I think it's good to target the communities that are similar, But we got a lot of information from going to Milpitas, which is a totally different environment.
And Sunnyvale.
And to Redwood City. We got information from different communities.
Sure.
And you can get valuable information, doesn't have to be exactly the same community. The police may be a little different than the library, but I think we got really valuable information from these other communities.
I just want to say, I think the police department is incredibly different than the library because there are a lot of more legal requirements for certain
Okay.
features
Well,
that we do not have now. So we cannot duplicate the square footage of our existing police department in its existing condition. So, I mean,
Well,
so I guess that's what would be needed from the consultant, I think, is a list of all the required
Yeah,
features.
just to be clear, we had a little different goal. So the library committee, I think, was very focused on what's in our library, what are the needs we want to have there. This subcommittee had a very different goal. Its goal was just to confirm, is this square footage reasonable or not?
Here's my challenge with respect to your charter, and perhaps it's how, if it needs to be amended, you could, or if it doesn't need to be amended, you can just move ahead. If it's a subcommittee that's gonna go out and do these phone calls and do that, get that chart together and bring that back. What we don't want to happen, because this committee is the champion of this project in the community, and you've gotta have a final product that you're jumping up and down about and saying, this is where we wanna go. What you don't want to happen is there becomes a minority report. There becomes, the subcommittee went out and got these numbers, the consultant came back with these numbers, we ended up with this, but we still disagree. And that, from the community's perspective,
You don't
won't
want
fly.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Even better, George, and part of
Yeah,
this.
yeah, to push back.
If
Go ahead,
part-
I think, excuse
that
me,
Sooner or later,
Phil?
we've got to sell this to the community.
Yeah.
And
Well-
there's no way that we're
Right.
going to sell these big numbers.
No,
There's
and
no
the
way.
community is the only way it's gonna get built.
Right.
Has Ed Flint looked at any of this?
Yes, he has.
He's right here.
He's right back.
Could you maybe have an opinion from Ed Flint right now?
Sure.
Chief, you're on.
Well, a couple of things. It's kind of like building that house where the foundation is an inch off on one end. By the time you put on the roof, it's a foot off. And the baseline for whatever the committee decides to take a look at to develop that baseline has got to be accurate. And one of the things I saw, and I wasn't here for the Blue Ribbon Committee, I do know that the level, the experience of interviewing people in Atherton have worked only there in that facility may not know what right looks like. And even when I sat down with Les Mulberg in the very early days when I first got here, I think there's some significant pieces missing for that. So I think what we're trying to do is, I think we need to run the course like we're trying to do, pull the information together. I think George is absolutely right. We need to rectify this because obviously we need to sell this. But we also need to remember that if that baseline wasn't accurate, okay, that foundation wasn't level, then we're gonna come up with something that's not accurate at the end. So I do think that talking to the new consultants that we have and getting them to justify that and looking at it. In fact, I put out an email to all, through the Cal Chiefs Association, to all the police departments, anybody that's either built a police department in the last 10 years, did a major remodel, or thought there would be something that they worked on that would be helpful to us, let us know. And we got
34, I think.
34 different agencies, and we basically said small to mid-size, because you probably shouldn't overlook from the design aspect of maybe an agency that's a little bit larger, or maybe has a business community, because they may have a really good model. They may have something you could take and compress down a little bit, and wow, that would really look good. They might have some economy of scale or things that they did that work well. And remember too, regardless of whether we do or do not have a business community, we generally have a lot of the same functions and more calls than, say, a town like Hillsborough. More calls for service, so.
For me, this was a process question, not an outcome question.
Yeah.
It just felt like we had such a different answer. We need a process to address it. And we can't just go, okay, or defend your, so to me, it just screamed, let's just go through it, find an objective way to evaluate it. It may be totally correct. It may be just that.
No,
But
I agree,
as
but we don't
fiduciaries,
know
we
if that
can't do
number is
that.
right.
Well, but, I don't even have the number.
Exactly.
I don't have any of the information.
And I can't
It's not-
think of two better people to be on the subcommittee than Steve and Dee Dee. you know?
Right.
I mean,
right.
that's ideal, so.
However, I think that in order to make this subcommittee work, you need a couple more, like with the library subcommittee, there were 4 of you, right?
Right.
Well, if we're gonna have to call the
Yes.
cop shop, the
Yes,
police department,
yes,
then
yes.
we're gonna need
Yes.
more help, yeah.
And so I think that all of this being
Yeah.
done at a meeting where a number of people weren't present, you know, kind of hamstrung you a little bit with only having, you know, 2 people to be on the subcommittee, and then, you know, thinking that you'll just rely on staff to do all the legwork. And then I think that's what made the bells and whistles go off a little bit. And, you know, we just really need to be very careful that we don't get into the detail of trying to design, you know, the facilities. What we're trying to do is figure out the master planning layout of this, this whole site, and reasonably size the building, the blocks.
Well, one thing we did to take some pressure off of that, while we're master planning, is we encouraged them to block together everything but the library.
Mm-hmm.
That it may, that the police building could be, the police department could be in the same building, but it will have its own entrance,
Mhm.
you know, it'll have safety and security,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't need to be a separate mass
Mm-hmm.
where it screams, wow, that thing got really big.
Got it.
It can be part of a larger building that,
I think that's always been the thought, that the efficiency of scale and the flexibility of maybe even sharing common, you know, areas.
and that's where the 4-story came in, is because they had broken it into police, and then kind of city manager, you know, finance, and then kind of planning, public works, I think those were the 3
I don't think
divisions,
we
or maybe
have-
it was library, everybody else.
4-story,
4-story
we do not even have a height.
It just got really small.
There would be, we
To make
do
those
not
separate
have
buildings.
the
Be
ability
careful what you
to
ask.
do that kind of height.
Well,
No.
it
How does
was,
that happen?
it came out of the community workshop, and they were just summarizing options for totally different designs in the community workshop. And part of the issue is that they encourage people to go with their imagination, and when you have people like us
Yeah.
go with our imagination, we get into architecture, and that's what happened in that community workshop. They got 4 totally different proposals, and I felt like at the last meeting, they kind of went with that, and we responded.
Yeah.
And they should have toned it down, because that wasn't what their charter was to do.
It'll be a different
but-
presentation today, you think?
We asked them to block it, the library's one thing, everything else is another thing, and 2 stories max, and the library should ideally be 1 story.
I know that when we went, I think it was
Colma, that was
The
the,
last
that was
time.
the one of choice.
They had just built the police station, from what I remember, that was maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
Mhm.
They gave us a mountain of information that was really, really valuable.
Right, and Chief has toured Colma.
Yep.
and
Well,
About
City
30 weeks ago,
managers,
I think the committee went, and people from the committee were invited.
And did NMR design it?
No.
No, it wasn't them, okay, I thought they did not, but anyway, but it would be good to be objective
yes.
and have this
And that
process
agency,
survive scrutiny.
that agency, Colma, is about the same size as Atherton
Yeah.
in terms of units, and wasn't their
It's a
station
10,000,
about twice, 3 times the
is
size
it
of ours?
10,000
It
square
was
feet?
larger, yes.
Yeah, considerably larger. So.
Than our existing one,
Than our existing
which is
one.
3,500 feet.
Well, it's 3-4 times as large as that one.
Yeah,
No, no,
so,
yeah, I think it's like 10 to 12,000 square
Right.
foot facility.
I think last week, did we see something like 17,000 feet for the police? It was huge.
Yes, we did,
It was-
that's right. So,
Well,
Had it done then,
when we did this for the library, we weren't quite as scientific. We didn't go out and look at the same communities and have the staff bring a list to us. We went to a couple that we knew about, and they referred us to who they thought were the best libraries for us to get the kind of information we wanted. It didn't take that much committee
Right.
time. We just called up people and made appointments.
Yeah.
They were happy to have us.
Yeah, yeah.
And really, it didn't take very much time. It was easy to do, and I'm certain the
Getting
police would be
a-
the same.
Objective list is the part where you ask for staff's help.
And we can assist them.
That's a few
Yeah.
hours, it's 2 or
Okay.
3 hours, and then we can call them if that's better.
All right,
Madam Chair,
Yes,
though,
sir.
perhaps to solidify what the next step is, as the Vice Chair indicated, have the consultant at least provide some framework to their discussion and how they came up with those numbers and what that is, justification for some of those numbers?
yes.
Or do you think they can do that?
Yes.
And then, once they've
And
done
in
that,
particular, in reaction to what came before.
Yeah, in fact, I think, if I may, I believe when they, and they may not have presented it in the detail, but they did talk about NM&R because they came back and said, you know, we thought we'd come in here, take a program that had already been developed,
Yeah.
and just have to update it and refine it a little bit. What we found, and I'm paraphrasing, and I don't want to put words in their mouth, but what they found, I guess I should say, was there were major omissions of function. And I believe they mentioned a few of those, but I think it's appropriate that we ask them to take, as Steve is suggesting, take both, you know, even the Blue Ribbon Committee, which did a good job of looking internally, take their knowledge of the 10 or 15 places they've designed, as well as others they've looked at, take the NM&R study and kind of do a side-by-side comparison. And they, as well as some of the people, you know, we could contact and the subcommittee could contact, could come up much like the library committee, subcommittee did, and say, here's the, you know, here's the 9 police stations built in the last 15 years you ought to take a look at. Here's 2 that were built in the last 15 years that if you talk to them on a rating of 1 to 5, they'll give it a 1 because it doesn't work well for the following reasons. So, and those may be ones you want to look at as well.
So let me just,
One
I
thing-
think NM&R, I think their final numbers that maybe they were looking at had been chopped by 25%. Remember, because they had presented what they felt were real, you know, solid numbers, and then the committee said, nope, cut it by 25%.
But they were still low. But one thing it may make that may be beneficial to staff not in a we don't believe the numbers, but in a help you way is one thing I remember struggling with a few years ago, and I think Blue Ribbon raised it, and then we picked it up. Was, gee, and I think it was this, do all the sergeants need private offices? I think that something like that came up, and you know, how do we know? How do we know, right? And so that's really a peer study. Either you just trust a consultant, or you do a peer study and say, what's the market out there for this? What is, you know, what have you seen over time?
So just in terms of agenda and looking at this, I think this is the right thing for a task them to do this. If they're not prepared to do it today, we should do it at the next meeting. We have one more meeting before we do the outreach meetings.
On the 22nd.
And if we're in agreement on it, it's about 15 minutes before they arrive. We could do the ad hoc committee reports, move that up on the agenda. They don't need to be here for that.
Right, so, yes, well, there's the agency.